We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happened.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! He's the loudest black man!
Once again, it is time for us to follow the money. So glad that you are with us on this most recent edition, along with Dr. Bowen Loftin, with Jon Heidtke. I am Andrew Monaco, and we're still in Final Four season. It's March Madness. First of all, howdy. Second, I can't wait to get both of yours opening tips. How about that? How clever was that? This is why you brought me on as the host for things like that.
My bets are already down, Andrew. My bets are already in. The whole
I'd love
bracket.
to, but I can't. I can't. John, wonderful time of the year, isn't it? A whole bunch of spring sports coming on. It's so much fun.
It is the best time of the year. I still tell people, I get asked from time to time. I've been fortunate to see a lot of great sporting events over the year and said, if you can only pick one, what would it be? And it's always the Saturday of the Final Four is one that always I pick, just because it's such a great day. You see four teams in there. You've probably got one Cinderella. Everybody's still in there. And again, the Monday's a little bit anticlimactic for the most part, but that Saturday is a special day, and look forward to that in a couple of weeks. So.
Dr. Loftin, is this carnival style? Do you just have a wristband so you can go to every single event that's going on?
As long as I write the checks for tickets, I can do that. Yes. So I love sports. My wife does too, and so we go to everything. We have season tickets to all Texas A&M sports, with one exception. I don't do track and field as a season. It's an all-day thing. And swimming and diving doesn't really sell tickets, and golf doesn't, and so on. So I show up a lot around athletic events here, and we just enjoy the heck out of that. That's why you retire in a college town, guys. Hint, hint.
That's exactly right. Dr. Loftin, I'm going to start with you. This isn't breaking, but this has happened and will have the impact. The vote by Dartmouth to unionize. What is the overall impact of that? Do we have an idea of how college athletics could be affected by this?
Well, let me give you a little background and make sure all of our listeners and watchers are going to be up to speed with this. Back in 2014, Northwestern University athletes voted to go union. That was approved by a regional part of the National Labor Relations Board, but overturned at the national level, and therefore it never happened. And the rationale for overturning it was, even though Northwestern was private, the NLRB only can address privates. They can't deal with public institutions, okay, the way the current law reads. And Northwestern is private, but they are what? They're members of the Big Ten. And the Big Ten has a number of public universities in its membership: Michigan, Wisconsin, the usual, Ohio State, and so on. So that sort of stopped that whole process back in 2014, 2015. It's just this kind of rolled out. But back on March 5th, Tuesday, March 5th, the men's basketball team at Dartmouth voted, I think it was 13-2 to unionize and join the Service Employees International local there in Dartmouth. So that's happened. And that was blessed by the regional National Labor Relations Board director. Okay, so that's perhaps where it's gone. Immediately, Dartmouth came back and said, foul, this can't happen. These are athletes. They're students first, but they're athletes also, but their student part dominates this, and it's totally unprecedented and inappropriate for us to let them unionize. So This will go up to the national, the NLRB nationally. Given its current makeup, I think they'll actually bless this. Dartmouth's in the Ivy League, which is private, and therefore there is jurisdiction through the entire conference for this to happen. So my guess is, given the current administration in place and who appointed the members of the board, we're going to see this blessed at the national level by the NLRB. That means Dartmouth goes to court, and it can take a while. So it'll be a while before this really works through all the litigation. And I'm hoping that the NCAA will actually do something rational for a change and negotiate a deal before it goes before a judge who makes a decision, which is even worse than it might be for the negotiation. So we'll see what happens, guys. But I'm just telling you this because here we have a really big step forward in a way that sort of gets past what stopped Northwestern back in 2014 from making it happen. And I think this will go all the way to the top in terms of the administration. The only possible way it might be derailed is by a judge and probably judges over time who look to a more conservative view of things and choose not to allow it to happen. But I think it's very likely this is going to happen. And I would hope that if it's getting likely, that the NCAA and the relevant conferences do not simply sit there and wait for a judge to make a decision, but actually try to negotiate a settlement that makes this thing go away. Alternatively, and we saw Senator Ted Cruz from Texas recently hosting an event about college athletics and NIL and the unionization, and we'll see if that maybe for the final time gets to a point where we'll have a law passed nationally that would make this all well understood. I just don't know. There's so much dysfunction in Washington right now and so many other priorities. I don't know that we're going to see that happening anytime soon, but I can still hope for it. And that'd be the best solution probably, is to have a national law. I hate to say that because I don't really like this sort of approach to it, but I think separate from judges making decisions and unelected boards making decisions, I think the best thing is for Congress to make a decision about how college athletics should be handled financially, not just NIL, but pay for play, unionization. All those things could be dealt with in a single piece of legislation if they're willing to do it. And I really appreciate both of your comments. I mean, Andrew, you have a great perspective on this by seeing the players and the coaches all the time and hearing their chit chat. Jon looks at this in a global way better than anybody else I know, and I'd love to see you weigh in a bit on your thoughts about how this might evolve.
Andrew, why don't you go first?
I have more questions than I have answers, Dr. Loftin. There are no scholarships in the Ivy League. So, and I know the athletic department, look, they don't bring in money. How are you going to pay players, and who's going to pay for them? I get the ramifications, but it's interesting coming from Dartmouth that it's not coming from big state university to do this. The ramifications of this are intriguing to me because it's Dartmouth. They're voting, but again, they're not scholarship kids. And I don't know how they're going to get paid. Who's the big money, Dartmouth or Ivy League, that has the importance of that? I mean, look, this is a conference that shut down for 2 years for COVID. I didn't think they cared about the student athletes' well-being then. And I know I'm conflating two things at this, but that's why I have more questions than I have answers for this. Like, we talk about athletic departments. It's way more academic in the Ivy League, is it not?
Well, it tends to be. There are exceptions to that. Athletics can be one of those places where there is a lot of give and take. I wish we had the late, great Mike Slive here. He played at Dartmouth. Mm-hmm. He was an athlete. I think it was field hockey, lacrosse, one of those sports he played at Dartmouth. And he would have the perspective of both a player and a future conference official. But you're right, Andrew. There's no money. I mean, there are schools. If you talk to Princeton and Harvard and Yale, even though the money's not athletically generated, they have money, lots of money there, and they could make it happen. Dartmouth is a pretty small school by comparison to those with limited resources. They have a very well-known medical school. So there's revenue being generated there. They've got money, but it's not coming out of people who buy tickets and donors appreciably, like it is in the conferences we are used to here in the SEC or the Big Ten, or even the ACC and the Big 12 and whatever that thing is on the West Coast. So that's the reality of it. And you're right. How would this work? I think that these players did this very deliberately. They were urged to do it by external individuals who told them it's going to be really good for you, without understanding all the ramifications of this thing. The amount of money they could get legitimately from their school, it can't be much. And yet there are going to be costs associated with this for them. They've got to pay union dues, and that won't be small for a 15-team group. Right. That won't be small at all. And so I don't know how that would work out. Who's going to be the shop steward? I mean, there's just all kinds of questions about this as far as how this works. But if you read what's been written about this and what they've said publicly, these players and their have gone out and talked to their counterparts in other Ivy League schools. And again, some of those schools do have money, real money. And so there is a lot of chit chat apparently among players right now in that conference anyway, talking about how they should go forward unionizing. Mm-hmm. I believe this was picked by the service international group, the unions themselves, because Dartmouth was small and very easily handled in terms of its complexity and magnitude compared to a Harvard or a Yale or a Princeton. So I think they made a very clear choice about this. It is a private school in a conference of private schools, which obviates the objections made back in 2014 to the Northwestern deal. So they've gotten past that problem, I suspect, and they have a very favorable administration right now for the unions. So I think this is going to go down the pathway of NLRB without any problems at all to the very top level and be approved. But then Dartmouth has to sue, and they will sue, I'm certain. And again, lawsuits like this could take a while. It could be in the Supreme Court's hands at some point down the road there, but it may take a decade to get there at the outside, maybe 2 to 3 years at the least. So we won't see the answer soon, but I do expect, based on lessons learned, I'm hoping that earlier in the process than before, we would see some very serious negotiations to lay out a framework for pay for play that makes sense in a unionized kind of setting here and respects the fact that you have extraordinary differences between a school like Dartmouth and Ohio State. That's what I think we have to figure out. And again, a national law is probably the best answer we could ever hope for here. But in the meantime, a really good negotiated settlement might be a good bridge part for us. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what else to say to the NCAA right now, but you better change your lawyer sets, change your mindsets, and try to make this work well for the college athlete and the fan, as opposed to just walking down a pathway which was way off the mark in terms of what NIL did to us and what other current litigation cases are doing for us.
You know, it's. I think again, you've seen the challenge here is that we're really, again, it all goes back to there's not one individual or one entity that's equipped right now to address these issues the way they need to be addressed. I mean, the NCAA has lost a lot of its power. The new president, Baker, is trying to do things. He's basically said we're going to have schools play at a higher level because they can afford to versus others that can't, and we need to be able to separate that. Separate those divisions or whatever they look like. So if he separates the divisions, he's basically punting it to the conference commissioners at that point, I think, to say, okay, how are you going to do it at the Big Ten and the SEC? So I think, again, that conversation needs to happen, because that's a different conversation if this is Mississippi State that's suing, for this versus Dartmouth. So again, it's been a long time since I took labor law, but again, if it's once you open up a whole other can of worms and unintended consequences, and the simplest thing, if I were Dartmouth at that point and I wasn't making any money, shut her down. It's a business. It's not making money. So that, I think, is going to be what a lot of schools are going to go to if this thing doesn't have any more guardrails, which you're talking about, Dr. Loftin. But I think the simplest thing would be they can show that this is not a money-making enterprise, and they're just going to shut it down. So that's what I would see the unintended consequence of all this is that, hey, we're trying to get these guys paid a couple of bucks, but if there's not a sport to play, then what do you do?
That's our next podcast, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And there are
exactly
many,
right.
so many.
I mean, and there's a gazillion of them out there every time one of these new lawsuits come up to play.
Yeah.
The one thing is for sure is the NCAA hasn't won one yet, and I don't anticipate him to win anyone soon. But again, I think we all know that. But again, what Baker's saying is he's kind of kicking the can down the road, just saying let's create two divisions, or create these divisions, and leave it up to those upper echelon divisions to compete. Put the guardrails or the rules around what that looks like. So I think, again, that would be a different conversation for the SEC and Big Ten than what it is for, the Ivy League and some of these others that may be facing similar lawsuits. So, again, I just think, again, to your point, it's creating another talking point that I think has to be resolved, but who in the position right now is the best to resolve it?
Yeah, that's a hard one. And again, the conferences vary quite a bit. The Big Ten has a number of major privates in it. Of course, it's still got the really big publics like Michigan and Ohio State. The SEC has one private. The ACC has a few privates. So again, most of the conferences that have the big money, except for with one exception, are mostly dominated by public universities. Within the Big Ten, we've got several private schools that have some degree of clout there. But I think the Ivy League, this was a very carefully planned activity, I believe. They picked Dartmouth. They picked the Ivy League for very good reasons based on the 2014 history of Northwestern. They knew what they were doing, the unions and those behind them, when they made this particular choice. And again, it's going to come down, and I think Andrew was right. You're right too, John, that the choice will be the school saying, well, okay, if that's the way it's got to be, we're going to just kill athletics. We'll have club sports, and that'll be the end of it.
Yeah,
and
simple.
that would be that's exactly what I think. Of course, then they'll yell union busting and all kinds of things like that back at them. But if you're actually subsidizing every sport you have with revenue that could go to academics, it's pretty easy to show a judge and jury that this is the way you have to go as a university. You can't afford to do it this way, but these athletes want you to do it. And I think it'll be ultimately resolved that way at some level. But I just don't know how far this will go. Again, I'd love to see either a very well-structured, comprehensive settlement done by the NCAA and its members, or a national law which clarifies all aspects of this. That would make every coach is bound to be longing for that kind of certainty right now, because it's so difficult to be able to assemble a team at any major sport and maintain that team's integrity over time the way things are today. And it's only going to get worse for a while, guys.
We're in transfer portal window for basketball already. Teams are saying we're not going to the NIT, things like that. Like that, every issue, to your guys' point, of whether the NCAA lost or the NCAA did not do anything and allowed the states to do it, and I'm referring to NIL, where the NCAA did say you can transfer with absolutely no penalty, they all come and they all crash into one another. That becomes all of this. And as we talked about in a previous episode, trying to untangle is really difficult. You can only seem to pull one thread at a time and solve a little bit of it. So here's one more layer to that. John,
here's one place, Guy, that the relatively new NCAA president could really show leadership. If he began to really lead and bring together a coalition of commissioners and major university ADs and presidents, it could be done on that side. But we didn't have that before. We have a possibility now, but I haven't seen proof of it yet. We'll see.
Almost a unified effort there, Dr. Loftin, about having that, hey, we've come to an agreement like this. Would that impression be even better as opposed to hands off?
I think if you can get the NCAA, the major conference commissioners, and key universities in the various large conferences to all speak with a common voice right now, that has political power. I mean, every major state university, a Texas A&M, Ohio State, a Michigan, Wisconsin, has major impact in that state's politics. And so you begin to get the attention of politicians and they're possibly blessing a solution done by the experts as opposed to a solution done by them, maybe, to get this thing done. They've gotten testimony from a number of commissioners already and ADs in Washington. More is coming, I'm sure, over time. But I haven't seen the wherewithal to really get a major piece of legislation on the table because there's so much else going on right now in terms of budgets and things like that. But I do think that having a number of the big players coming together and saying, let's figure it out. Let's put together a comprehensive look at how college athletics needs to pursue its future and agree on that. If that were to happen, that would have a major impact, I think, either on a solution that's negotiated or on an eventual legislation item.
John, a new college football playoff is coming. Revenue is coming, obviously, for that. Look, we don't know if it's going to be 12 or 14 teams, but what was figured out was how to share the revenue. And it ain't equally, is it?
No, it's not. Under the old playoff rules, it was distributed equally among all the schools and conferences. And I think one of the sticking points or the challenging points was that in this new relationship, obviously the deal doubled. ESPN's paying $1.3 billion for the rights for the next 8 years to televise this tournament. And I think, again, one of the things that they decided was, again, and you're just saying it again, it's just reiterating what we're saying, following the money that the Big Ten and the SEC at the end of the day are going to be generating roughly $21 million per each school in their conferences right there. So they're at the top of the list of this newfound revenue that's going to be coming in there. You got the ACC and the Big 12 right now. They're coming in at second at probably 12 to 13 million per school, for what they're going to be getting. You get the group of five, then it really falls off. They're going to get about $1.5 million per school from that standpoint. And then if you're poor Washington State and Oregon State, you're going to get about $300,000 for what you're getting there. Now, Notre Dame's going to get some, and I'm not sure what that number all turns out. There's some for independence, but my Notre Dame number is probably going to be somewhere between that 21 and 13 when it's all said and done, depending if they make it, not make it. There's some assurances there. So still a few more things to work out. But I think the headline on this is, here again, is the Big Ten and the SEC continue to separate themselves from the rest of the field on this in terms of the revenue that they're going to be generating from this new television agreement. And they're going to probably have the most amount of schools playing in this process. And again, if they're going to be units or however that looks like, there's probably additional revenue that's going to be coming their way when this is all said and done, based on how many of their schools end up playing in that championship match every year. So again, it's just the rich get richer through this process. And I think, again, it keeps everybody else in the game. But again, I think one of the reasons we saw on this just breaking news today is now that Clemson has joined Florida State in that lawsuit to get out of the ACC, because they realize that if they're stuck in that conference till 2034, they ain't going to be playing at that level. And there's still an opportunity for them now to say, all right, how do we align ourselves, or how do we now move up into this next tier of schools and become closer or become part of what is an expanded Big Ten or expanded SEC. So I think, again, that's been handwriting's been on the wall for months now. But here's another concrete example of what they're trying to do to help accelerate that process.
Do you think it helped of Clemson jumping in by saying, was Florida State making any advances into getting out of their grant of rights?
I don't know that for a fact. Haven't seen anything that would lead me to believe it or not. But again, your members make up the rules of your conference. So, a simple saying would be that if you get more schools who are upset with or who want to make a change in that, and you can get a few more schools to come on board, then I think that becomes that becomes part of the process. So I think, again, if you're looking back there, my guess is North Carolina and Clemson and these other schools have been privately rooting for Florida State to continue to push down this road. But now, Clemson has publicly stated, we're going to get in the foxhole with you, Clemson. So it'll be interesting to see what school pops in there next with them. So will that be North Carolina? Will that be Virginia? Will that be Miami? Whoever it turns out to be. Apparently,
there's a coalition of 7. I don't know who the other 5 are besides Florida State and Clemson. I think North Carolina being one. But apparently it's 7 of the ACC schools would like to also be a part of this. And yeah, I know that has expanded. It's a larger conference than it was in the past.
Yeah.
That's a lot of schools.
My guess is you look at the people who voted against expansion are probably in that group right now. So,
well, the key, guys, is this: there's going to be a interesting set of processes here legally to go forward. What I've seen so far from Florida State is them playing the card that we're a state school. and it's not proper for this extra governmental thing over here called the ACC to deal with us in a particular kind of way. So they're making the argument ultimately of sovereign immunity, that we're a sovereign thing, a state school compared to maybe a private school, and we should be allowed to be treated differently. And we have the right to claw back the rights agreement that we signed or was signed for us some years ago for the ACC. And that's the basic argument being made right now. I can see every state school coming into this, and I believe the 7 you mentioned, they're all state schools as far as I know, Andrew. And so I think that's going to be a lever they can use here, and depending on the court, what kind of a judge they get and jury they get, if they go to a jury trial, how this plays out. But it'll be tried probably in a state court. Think about that, and that has a lot of potential for those schools getting an answer they would like to have compared to maybe a federal court. So we'll see how this plays out. I think it'll be very interesting to watch. And the only thing I can say is it won't be happening quick.
No. Jon, was the grant of rights part of the deal to get the ACC network?
I'm sure it had to be, because again, the grant of rights were originally construed so that, again, it was trying to eliminate or keep schools from jumping from conference to conference. So the conference negotiated their television deal, and so then all the schools gave their grants of rights to the conference for the commissioner, whoever it was, to negotiate on all of their behalves. So if they did leave, even their television rights would still stay with who the conference was. So I think, again, that was a provision that would put in when the first wave of conference realignment started to rear its ugly head, was that the schools would say, look, this showed their solidarity to being part of that. Let's put our rights together. And this was back when, there wasn't the super conferences that we know today, was that everybody was kind of right in that same ballpark, equal revenue sharing with the CFP, et cetera. So it made a little bit more sense. But I think today everybody realizes, okay, that was, it's done best man for themselves. Where do we end up? And again, there's obviously two places right now that everybody's got their eye on who are not in the SEC or the Big Ten.
Well, Clemson joining in makes that, I think, a little more fascinating with that. And again, could see another division of that conference and then jumping to the other ones. Monday of this week, Trev Alberts was named the new athletic director at Texas A&M, and a couple of things stood out to me in his announcement. He talked about the new wave of athletics and athletic director. He talked about, even though he is a former All-American and Hall of Fame linebacker, that ADs now have to have a business sense. And he talked about generating new revenue. So for Texas A&M and Kyle Field, they're going to have an international match, soccer, Brazil and Mexico. And a week later, George Strait is playing there. When you're talking about generating new revenue, why not use your football stadium to generate that revenue with an international soccer match? And the king is going to be playing Kyle Field.
Exciting times in College Station, that's for sure, Andrew. And I'm waiting to get my tickets for the George Strait Conference as we talk today, as a matter of fact.
If Dr. Loftin jumps out of his chair, he got his seats.
But your point is well taken here. I mean, you say, and you said that this is an opportunity for new revenue. I fully agree with that. My question is going to be, who gets the revenue? One can assume, if you're looking at this in a very naive kind of way, that if the football stadium is what you're going to rent out, the money goes to athletics. But I would opine that there is a possibility of an alternative outcome here, and that is that the university might say, this stadium belongs to us. It's managed by our athletic department. But I think if we're going to make a net of X million dollars off of George Strait appearance here at this stadium, that has to go either totally or in part to the university as a whole, as opposed to one part of the university. So once you pay for the expenses, you could argue that athletics is taken care of because they've got whatever it takes to fix up the stadium after the event. So what do you think, Jon and Andrew? Is this an outcome that we might be looking forward to here? Is it the university might be the ultimate beneficiary as opposed to the Department of Athletics at Texas A&M?
I wonder if it becomes split. I wonder if
That's a
it's
possibility.
I wonder if it's something like that. Like there will be a percentage to each, because you have to figure with George Strait, this is like a sellout Saturday at Kyle Field
Yeah.
with probably additional revenue. If Dr. Loftin, you were talking about some of the costs for those tickets, and then this becomes very attractive to a suite holder. They're going to use their suite for that. So I wonder if the revenue is even more than what they get on a Saturday
I
for a
think it
sold
could
out
be.
Kyle
It
Field.
could be. And not just the selling of tickets, guys. There'll be a separate process by which one buys one's parking here. And so parking is a place you'll make some money as well. That's probably strictly going to be a university kind of profit. And that spread, and we handle it in a way here because there's cost of parking with attendance and things like that. But I think that there is not just that, just concessions. And there's a lot of revenue sources going into this. And don't forget about the local community in terms of hotel rooms and things like that. This is back to back with two major events that are going to attract a lot of people who don't live physically here right now. It's very clear that the Kyle Field concert by George Strait will probably set a record for the world in terms of a ticketed concert event and the attendance therein. So I think that's likely to happen. The current record is 107,000. They've stuffed more than that in Kyle Field when you do SRO type stuff. So I'm guessing we'll be able to set a new world record here for the size of the audience, number one. Number two, it's going to be, I think, an all-day affair, even though it's a nighttime event. Getting here, eating, getting ready to go, all those kind of things will be all money makers for somebody. And that's going to be a good thing for the university, a good thing for the communities. But I really think that it's going to be interesting to see the internal thought processes here by the university leadership as far as how the profit, if you will, from this event is distributed through the entire institution.
And I don't want to discount the Brazil-Mexico soccer game because we know how loyal Mexican fans are. They played at the Alamo Dome, and they love El Tri, and they were there. And I think that's going to be another just fantastic event.
It'll be sold out too.
Yes,
no
it will.
question about that. It's somewhat cheaper, I think, than George Strait tickets will be. My only concern there is those fans are known for their enthusiasm. So we'll just see how it all works out in the stadium, what's thrown and what's not thrown, and what happens around the stadium that day. I guess the only thing I could say, as you mentioned, is it's really a Mexico thing. As far as I suspect we'll have Brazilians here, but they can't possibly become the numbers that would be here to cheer on Mexico in terms of that particular game's outcome.
But we know how big soccer is in Dallas. It's huge. So anybody who is a fan of soccer gets a chance now to see an international match like this. It'll be fun because soccer fans will descend on Kyle Field as well. I like it. I like it. I think it's great. And by having marquee matchups, I think also does that. Look, this has been in the works for a while. There was talk about using Kyle Field for things like this. It's nice that it's paid off. But to your point, Dr. Loftin, that's why we follow the money.
Well, Andrew, my question for you is this. You're the voice of Kyle Field.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, that voice may need to speak a little Spanish. So can you step
solamente
up
un poco.
to the plate?
Solamente un poco. Yeah.
Can you step up, sir?
Look, I've got a lot of help because Anderson Garcia, he's Dominican. He plays basketball. Ali Camarillo from Chula Vista, California. He's got some Mexican heritage there. Chris Cortez as well. I got friends in high places.
And goal translates in all languages. You just have to do the elongated version.
I don't know if I can hold it out that long. I'm just not that sure.
At least 20 seconds.
That's right. But John, that's not something relatively new. This is what teams have looked at for years. How can we generate more revenue?
anytime you look across the country, these big venues, 60,000 and plus, NRG in Houston, AT&T in Dallas, Alamo Dome in San Antonio, they're all looking for ways to bring these additional events that can create other, revenue opportunities for the organization. And to your point, again, I think in terms of the revenue split, I think, again, A&M will benefit from it, but, how does that money get split? Is it 50-50 with the school and athletics? I'm sure there's some, some of probably the more tenser negotiations are those behind the scenes versus, getting the overall deal done sometimes. So I think, again, that will be fascinating to see. But I do think, again, this is another way that you've got this facility, 100,000 plus that gets used 7 or 8 times a year. How do you find more value for it? And these are certainly two, I think, marquee moments that can help set the building on that path. And if the word of mouth is good that these events were very well done, I think it certainly sets you up to be, part of that rotation of when these sort of super groups, super concerts, marquee international soccer games, et cetera, you get into the rotation now.
I think it'll be interesting to see how it works out with the department itself. I mean, I can't speak for the current leadership at all. I think we have a brand new AD here at Texas A&M. But I'll just tell you from my history, an AD I worked with, and I won't mention any names, obviously, but an AD I worked with when I was president was very resistant to anything at Kyle Field except football. Very resistant. So even putting together a simple concert with a group of people that would speak to breakaway and things like that was anathema, this individual. And so I had to go through a lot of negotiations sometimes myself to get anything there. Reed Arena was a little bit different because it had more of a history of doing external events, and it's a little bit more designed for changing things around than a grass field is. But I remind you that's the issue here. The ADs are sort of internally programmed to protect their turf. And I do mean that in a very real way. Because of what it's used for. And that can be a resistance to having an explosion, if you will, Andrew, of many, many more events at Kyle Field. I think that's going to be a question to see how this plays out. But the need for revenue is never ending, sir.
Well, the new AD had 92,000 show up for a Nebraska volleyball game.
Amen to that.
If that gives us an idea of things that can happen. And of course, Jamie Morrison being the volleyball coach at Texas A&M, he's like, that would be awesome. But
he's saying, yes.
That's right. You can do things like that because volleyball is huge in Nebraska. Iowa's outdoor basketball game. You can do things when you have that kind. But again, I think back to thinking outside the box, not so much it's got to be so out there, but just thinking about things like that. Look, Trev Albert said, look, we're going to make mistakes and we apologize up front, but it's not going to be the same old. To me, here's the other thing that gets me. He had signed an extension, is from Nebraska, but came to Texas A&M. I think it says a lot about Texas A&M that happens when you see that happen. Look, I'm going to say the same thing. I know Ross wasn't from Oxford. He brought Michael Thompson, who grew up at Oxford. I think it says a lot about when AD is at a school where he played or has ties and goes to someplace else. I think it says an awful lot about the new school that he or she goes to. Sometimes, look, we know some ADs leave because they don't like what's happening and they're running away from something. But I think in the case of Texas A&M, I think you're running to something. And then interesting to see how Trev Alberts does in the Trev Alberts era, if you will.
It'll be fine. I mean, I think he has the assets. He has the ability demonstrably to do the job. I think you can look back at many ADs here. Some have been judged successful, some not. One that I was involved with hiring was judged to be somewhat unsuccessful because he never quite engaged with the Aggie fan base as well as one would have hoped. And that's a situation here. This guy is a former athlete himself. He played, you said, at an All-American level in college. So he has that asset working for him. He seems personable. He seems smart. So I wish him well. I think he has all the right pieces. We'll just see if he can bring them to bear here at Texas A&M and have a great time as the AD and see things really mature as they should here.
John, that's where ADs have changed, right? That engagement, that embracing of the university. It's no longer just staying in your office and getting things done behind the scene. There's much more that goes into a director of athletics now.
Yeah, and I think you heard it in some of his comments yesterday. It was just about how it's become a business, and the AD world has changed, and that chair has changed dramatically. And the type of person you need sitting in there today, with all of the issues that are going on in that world, someone who can kind of juggle all those, start moving that process versus getting some of these things resolved. We talked about it earlier in the podcast. We got this union issue in Dartmouth. All right, what does that mean? What can we start doing now today to try to? Is that an NCAA issue? If it's not, how do we kick it upstairs? What do we do to get it going? So I think, again, the world of the AD today is going to be so much different than it was even 3 years ago, in terms of what they have to address to these particular situations. And your job is going to change dramatically depending what conference you're in as an AD in this world going forward too. So I think you're going to see a lot more guys probably with a business background pedigree, at the upper echelons versus, a traditional AD role that might be at a Western Kentucky or a Citadel or something along those lines, in this day and age. So I think, again, he is cut from the cloth of that. I think that the AD what the universities are looking for, particularly who are going to have to make adjustments with all of both the legislative issues that are dealing with, the revenue issues that are dealing with, and ultimately how does the governance issue deal for the schools that are going to play at these particular levels.
He mentioned adjusting and adapting. And if you've been an AD in the last 4 years, from having the world shut down, right, to the world of NIL and transfer portal, you've had to adjust and adapt every single day, it seems.
Yeah. There's been an incredible amount of press, guys, about him coming from Nebraska and why he left Nebraska to come here. I've read most of that stuff I got my hands on. I've got a lot of friends in Nebraska, a lot of friends in the Big Ten. One thing that hasn't really come out a lot, which I will just mention here uniquely on this podcast, is that there is a problem with Nebraska in the Big Ten. You all know, I've said this before, Nebraska joined the Big Ten as a member of the prestigious AAU, the elite universities of the country. And they were shortly kicked out of the AAU after joining the Big Ten. And every other school member of the Big Ten is an AAU member. The only exception is Nebraska. And that has caused friction. Repeated friction between Nebraska and the rest of its colleagues in the Big Ten, and so I think that that may be one small factor. I think that A&M clearly has been accepted and is viewed as a very, very important cog in the SEC wheel. It's an AAU school and it's in a conference which has a limited number of AAU schools. And one of the reasons that I think Slive wanted A&M in the conference was because of its academic prestige, as well as its other attributes. And so that is a good thing. I think he sees possibly coming in here as an AD that he's going to be an AD at a school which is a very good fit within its conference, whereas the school he's leaving has not been viewed as a great fit. And they haven't done well athletically either, have they, John? They've struggled athletically, especially in their sport of football, which they claimed real important goals in over their lifetime as a football school. That hasn't been maturing in the Big Ten. So I think there could be a lot of subtlety to why he might have chosen to come here. I'm glad he's here. I think he'll be a good AD. I wish him again well in that. And speculation knowing why he's leaving Nebraska has been rampant and all over the map. But nobody's really dug into the point I made just now that it's maybe there's a lot of friction there that he's not enjoyed having to deal with because the ADs have to rub shoulders all the time. And if you're an AD from Michigan or Wisconsin or Ohio State, and you're going to be looking at this AD over here at Nebraska, which is viewed as a lesser school by many in the Big Ten, that makes your life a little bit less attractive than you like for it to be as an AD. And I think it'll be a very different experience for him at Texas A&M.
Totally agree.
One interesting thing about, just to tie a bow around that with our television friends, it's interesting to see their sense of humor, that both in the bracketing, we've got A&M and Nebraska playing both on the men's and women's tournament. So don't think that just happened by happenstance.
Who thought that up? Exactly. I thought about that. Both teams are going to be right there.
Schedulers have a good way of trying to match those things up so they happen. I know a couple of times they tried to get A&M and Texas to play in a tournament. Things just didn't work out that way. But I thought that was an interesting, just the way that the selection committees came out this past week.
Yeah, not just the men, but the women. And of course, if you're going to have the two schools play, you want to play in Corvallis, Oregon. Look, last year in Des Moines,
nothing tells me like spring like Corvallis, Oregon.
Last year in Des Moines had the Aggies advanced, likely playing Texas. 2 years ago in NCAA regional, it was Texas. I'm sorry, it was Texas A&M and Schloss's former school, TCU.
Yeah.
And personally, Schloss said he didn't like it. If you give it a couple of years, I thought it was unfair to both schools. I'm not going to lie. Like I get how clever they want to be. I don't think it's very good for the coaches or the players.
They don't appreciate the dynamics of that locker room. They look at the headlines it's going to generate.
And I found it fascinating that it was Matt Rule, and Nebraska's football coach, who came out and said, you know what? You're taking the focus off the student athlete. And I give Matt Rule a ton of credit for saying that. Because look, that TV crew that's going to be there for TNT is going to talk about Trev Alberts, right? That's going to be one of the storylines, because I promise you, Spiro Deeds, Jim Spinarkle have not watched Texas A&M or Nebraska until now, right? So that's going to be the narrative, and I agree with Matt Rule. You're going to take away from the Wade Taylor IV. You're going to take away from the student athletes in that game, and I dare say it's going to be the same way ESPN covers the women's game when Texas A&M plays Nebraska. It's going to take away from what Joni Taylor has done. It's going to take away from Aisha Coulibaly, things like that. I thought it was interesting that Matt Rule from Nebraska had said that.
Well, storylines are storylines. You're talking head essentially. Okay, I'll use that loosely for you anyway. But I mean, do you make those decisions yourself as far as what to highlight as a talking head when you're trying to do fill around the game, or is someone in your production side telling you what to do? Give us some insight of that world.
Being on the team side and then having done packages for national networks, it's very much producer driven. So when your producer's coming out of, let's say it's Bristol for ESPN or New York for CBS, you're just getting the national picture, where here, being with Buzz Williams, for me on our network, it's very Aggie driven. But having been on that, no, it starts bigger umbrella, and then you can kind of go down. If you're doing a game and it's the son of somebody, that becomes part of it. But no, John, fair to say, sometimes when you're in that national package, you kind of pick the low-hanging fruit and you don't really get to dive as deep as you would like to.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the situations of one of the reasons why, going way back when, the regional networks were important, because it gave you your hometown team. All sports are tribal. Your fans wanted to dive in and be super served on their team versus getting some national guys covering the game who may not. I can't tell you how many letters I used to get. You probably got them from the Spurs when we would cover the Spurs. And the next thing you know, then they're on TNT that night. Why is Charles Barkley ripping Tim Duncan? Let's put back, give me Monaco and Elliott again. That's, so you get that process there, but that's the nature of the beast. That's what fans are for, and the national guys have a tougher time sometimes coming in, just dropping in and then getting out. So, and being able to tell that story, because there'll be a lot of, and you read the message boards after game when somebody nationally does it, they're getting skewered because, it's, again, you're doing a good job when both schools are ripping you because they think you're favoring one team. So that's when you've hit the sweet spot. So,
I mean, just to give you an idea, we'll go into Memphis, and there's about a 15-minute window to talk to the head coach. There's a 15-minute window to talk to the student athletes. Now, you're going to do that for 8 schools, because there are 4 in the South Regional, 4 in the West Regional. So Baylor's going to go in, but you can't learn all of it for that. Now, there's a ton of research and notes that all the announcers will get from Turner and from CBS or Warner Brothers Discovery for that. But it all depends on, relationship. Is a coach outgoing, things like that. So it's a little more difficult. You do that, but I see where Matt Rule's coming from.
Yeah.
I totally see where he's coming from.
He's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still, again, until we start paying them so they become employees, they're still, student athletes first. But again, this part of the conversation we're talking about, this is what you get when you start to get into this world. Now you're potentially an employee, you're going to be treated like that at all levels, fair or not fair.
Yeah. Fun. It still is a great time. I'm with you, John. I love
like
this. When you start on a Thursday and you've got games all day, you just have to put on your TV.
Yeah. Now it gets harder if you've got to go from streaming to cable because you got to go back and forth in different platforms. So we got to resolve that issue.
The Final Four and the championship is TBS this year, correct?
Is it?
I don't think I think it is. But this goes back to my point. You're going to see nothing but stories saying the finals, the ratings weren't as high. Mm-hmm. Cable can never outrate over the air. Yeah. So that story is already built in. We're going to see that. But that's the nature of the beast because CBS did not have cable except for CBS Sports Network, so had to tie in with Turner for their channels for all of this.
Yeah, I saw this morning, guys, one of our talking head prognosticators has come out and said that A&M is going to go all the way, whatever that means, in the tournament. So we will see if that guy's on track or not.
For everybody who blasted Stephen A. Smith in the past, now all of a sudden he's their favorite.
Yeah, funny about that, isn't it? Funny about that. I'm not going to name names, but you can do that.
I will. Yeah, I will.
I don't think Stephen A. has watched a minute of A&M basketball all year.
I'm sure of that.
100% right there. 100% right there. I totally agree with that. Just a blast. Can't wait to get together again.
Yeah.
Dr. Loftin, thank you so much. John, thank you. Dalton Hughes, appreciate you producing this podcast. collegesportsftm@gmail.com is how you can send us an email. We will answer your question on a future episode of Follow the Money. I'm Andrew Monaco. So long, everybody.